The province of Quebec has for years been working overtime to become as secular as possible, even putting a secularism law in place. And this is now having an impact on a Christian congregation in the city of Seguin, as they have been evicted from their rental facility because it happens to be a publicly owned facility. So joining us to discuss what's going on here is Olivier Seguin. He is a lawyer with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Good to have you with us, Olivier.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Well, can you share, first of all, a bit of the backstory with us? I mean, when and how was the Church of Two Shores notified of their eviction?
Okay, so I would say that this case is very, very simple. It's a proceeding of like 2 pages. What's really relevant is like the topic of secularism, basically. So they rented a facility in at the end of 2024. For a period of 2 years, I believe, something like that. And a couple weeks after they rented it, they received a message coming from, basically the manager of the rent, which was not the city, but quoting an email that they received from the city, saying that according to I'll call it the secularism law. It's basically, I won't say it in French, but there's an act about secularism that is not precise. It needs to be interpreted. A bit like a constitution must be interpreted. It says that the state must be separate from religions, must be neutral, equality of citizens, liberty, I would say freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. And that's basically that. So it has to be interpreted by basically every public body that belongs to the province. So interpreted in a certain way, and they decided that because they were celebrating the Mass on Sunday, they were renting it for basically like an hour a week to celebrate Mass because it was religious, like their activity was religious. They interpreted their, let's say, the law, the Secularism Act, as I said, as not permitting it.
Okay, so basically the facility manager or whatever, they got a letter from or an email from the city, and so they basically passed this on to the folks, the church renting this facility. And so there were no complaints from the public. I mean, they're not being rowdy, nothing like that, right?
The story, but we don't exactly know. But I heard, let's say, from a horse mouth. Is that
Yeah,
what
from the horse's mouth. Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so yes, it came from a complaint from a citizen. I
Oh,
would say Saguenay is an interesting place in a way. It's known to have like I would say a vibrant Christian and conservative and Christian. There's a lot of like I would say very strong. It's strong in terms of Catholic faith. Uh, our clients are not Catholic. That being said, they're Protestant. But it's also known for I would say a strong dedication to secularism.
so you have
There's
this,
a
you have this clash of the two streams, and
Yeah,
there is actually a strong.
there's a clash, a very
Okay.
strong clash, almost a war, I can say, because two camps.
So now the city, by the way, just to clarify, they were aware, right, from the beginning that the facility was actually going to be used for a religious service. Did they?
They basically delegate I would say the renting of the leases to basically to a management group
Oh,
who
okay, I
takes
gotcha.
care
So
of
so
those.
they knew about it, but they're not the city. So again, through this complaint, okay, gotcha. Just to kind of find out how this all came to be. All right. Now, okay. So basically, because it's a public facility, that's what this is all about, right? So, and again, this is a Quebec secularism law. Maybe could you just clarify what that all entails, the secularism law? Because I know it's separation between the state and the religion, right? Now, this ties in, of course, with religious symbols, clothing not being allowed, for teachers or, police officers, doctors, nurses, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. So it was, I mean, it comes from, I would say, the insister of that was not voted for political reasons. Uh, there was the Quebec Values Charter that was never voted in 2016, I think, under the Parti Québécois. In 2019 was voted basically the same thing. It was another name under another party, which is called, let's say in English, the secularism law. So it basically says, I would say it's in two parts plus the notwithstanding clause. It starts basically by saying like principle. It states that the state is secular, and it states like a few principle. I mentioned it earlier of like what constitute secularism. In French, it's called laicity. Laicity. It's like the translation of that word. I'm not sure that it really exists in English, but they called it laicity even in English. So separation from church and state. I was like religion to be broader. Um, Neutrality, of course. Equality.
So the government needs to be neutral in all of this toward religion, right?
That's it. And then it also mentions freedom of religion and freedom of conscience.
So the secularism law still has to respect freedom of conscience and freedom of religion, right?
Yeah, that's it. Correct. Then, okay, it says that it must apply to basically every government entities. We speak obviously of Quebec government entities.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's almost, I would say, a dress code. Like you cannot wear the kippa, this and that, like a religious symbol. It's not obvious, like it's not directly aiming things like the kippa, but like we need to be honest when we look at what happens. And I would say that the driving force of that was like a reaction to Muslims, basically.
Right, because there's been a large immigration level that's come into Montreal, et cetera, and very noticeable, of course. And so there was a public pushback to that, you mean?
Yeah,
Okay.
like it's. I mean, it's not official, but it almost is. And in fact, like we have, and I'm just trying to explain it sociologically, but we have like a much bigger community of Muslim people in Quebec that you have in English, for like immigration reasons that touch with language and this and that. And at the end of this act, there is the notwithstanding clause, which basically say that the Canadian Charter and the Human Rights Charter of Quebec doesn't apply. So it could be it, it's very interesting, I would say, theoretically, like how should we construe it if the charter doesn't apply, but there are some principle in the law. So anyway,
So where do
those
you
are
find that line to walk, right? Because I don't think, even most Quebecers or most Canadians wouldn't be really happy if there was, you said, well, you can't go to church ever, Well, I mean, that would be, it would be obviously very, very wrong, right? But here, though, again, the law isn't just words on paper. It has, the effect of the law has a tangible impact on real human beings. In this case, for example, there's the pastors of this church, the congregants, the people who are going to the church. They are now, well, there's no building for them to, so how did this impact them? And what was their response?
Okay, so it was not a problem for them. Like they quickly found another premises in another church. So we're not even uh, uh, we're not even asking the court to give them back the premises that they rent. This case is, I would say, really about I must be honest. I joined them. And they didn't join me, and I explained them how it was like really important to I would say to have a discussion in court about the scope of this law, the secularism law. So of course, like we defend it. It's free. It's based on donations that are it's basically financed by the Justice Center. And like we really fight here for freedom of religion. It's not really about them, because indeed they found another place. They're happy where they are. They don't want to like impose, if they're not welcome there. They don't want to rent a place if they're not welcome. It's
Right, but
their.
it's a slippery slope, and it's an important case, isn't it? Because, I mean, there's a lot at stake in this particular case, right? Because, depending on how this case turns out, it sets a precedent for religious freedom in Quebec, doesn't it?
That's right. I would say that there's always, I would say, a balancing that we need to do, a risk assessment. Like if we fight a case and we lose, it sets a precedent that might be harmful. So we choose our case, always like assessing the risks. And in this case, let's say we don't fight it, it's going to be applied. Factually speaking, it's going to be applied by other cities in the same way. It's going to become part of, let's say, the customs, the way that the law is being interpreted. But what you say is right. If we lose or if we win, there's there's something at stake. So yeah, absolutely. And it's about interpreting the secularism law, probably more. I'll have to think about it, but probably more than even like charter rights, because there is the notwithstanding clause.
So how are you? What's your argument going to be before the judge? What's your basic? This is why we're right, and the city is wrong.
At the end of the day, it's there's like one part. The Secularism Act states a few principles. One of those principles is like freedom of religion. Freedom of religion is part of like secularism. Okay, so based on that, it shouldn't be interpreted by a city in this manner. And secondly, if it shouldn't be interpreted in this manner, like let alone the fact that it's ultra virus, it's also unconstitutional, because if it's not based on this law that contain the notwithstanding clause, then the charter applies, the Canadian charter. So I would
Yeah,
say they're
okay.
not.
Well, I think you have a good case. I guess it depends on who you get as a judge, but it seems to go too far, doesn't it? And again, where do you go from there? So what if the Pope visits Saguenay and speaks at City Hall? Are they going to say no? You'll have to speak somewhere else, sir. Right? Or what if a church group is helping feed the poor and they're renting a public facility? Do they get kicked out? Well, what kind of support is this particular case getting from the public? Is there a lot of, rumbling in the city on this particular issue?
I would say this case, and those are discussion that we have in term. There is, at the moment that we speak, a committee that's reunited. It's named by the government to basically to think about secularism, and without going in too much details, we know that they are very inclined to use the notwithstanding clause, and they're not. I would say that they're not too friendly with religion. Like, to be honest, like I still think that what they have in mind is basically Muslims. That being said, they don't really like Christians as well.
Okay.
I don't think that's is the driving force, but they don't really like Christians. So in Quebec, we've been very, I would say, very reserved. We have an interview with you. Like this was in our news release in English, but here in Quebec, there's a discussion that I want to have with the court, and we don't make too much noise.
Very
years.
interesting. So it's a different culture, isn't it? So than in the rest of Canada, for sure. Okay. Well, thank you for taking the time to kind of just give us a bit of the background, explaining what's kind of going on behind the scenes and so forth, and why this is important. I think it is. So appreciate your time, Olivier.
Thank you again for having me.
Yeah, all the best in this upcoming case here. Olivier Seguin is a lawyer with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms.